think a ship sinks because it loses its fight against the water? No, you're mistaken. A ship dies when it loses its fight against time. Imagine standing in the suffocating dark, feeling the steel floor beneath you inhale and exhale like a dying lung. Then you hear it, a catastrophic crack, echoing through the hull like a mercy killing. On the Great Lakes, we don't fear the storm's fury, we fear its rhythm. We fear the Three Sisters, a geometric assassin that finds the exact heartbeat of a vessel and stops it cold. Tonight, we aren't just recounting tragedies. We are stepping inside the resonance trap to witness how the world's iron titans were dismantled by the invisible, haunting physics of a November gale. I invite you to walk this journey with me until the very final moment. Once you've looked into the mathematical eyes of the abyss, you will never look at the horizon with simple eyes again. Let the secrets of the deep unfold. The name Three Sisters carries a deceptive, almost graceful elegance. To a casual observer, it sounds like a poetic tribute to the water. But to a sailor on the Great Lakes, it is a chilling personification of a coordinated, malevolent force. This term was coined by European and American crews, who witnessed the waves not as random chaos, but as a deliberate, tactical entity working in tandem to drag massive ships into the abyss. However, we must realize that long before the first steel keel ever touched these waters, long before the era of steam engines, GPS, or satellite weather, the indigenous Ojibwe people already held the map to this terror. They understood the lethal patterns of the lake centuries before European physicists ever developed the complex equations to explain them. To the Ojibwe, Lake Superior was not just a body of water. It was Gichigami, the Great Spirit or the Great Water. They lived in harmony with its temperament and respected its wrath. Within their oral traditions, passed down through countless generations of birch bark canoe travel, was a stark and terrifying warning about the rhythm of death. They knew that when the winds turned north in the dying season of November, Gichigami would unleash its anger in a specific terrifying sequence. They observed that the waves would arrive in sets of 3. 2 waves meant to test the strength of your vessel and the skill of your paddle, followed immediately by a 3rd wave, larger, heavier, and far more violent, arriving before the canoe could ever recover its balance. This was not mere folklore or superstition. It was vital survival data encoded into their culture. The sailors who came much later, building their massive iron titans and thinking themselves masters of the inland seas, would eventually learn this same lesson. But they would learn it in steel and blood, whereas the Ojibwe had learned it in wood and bone. To truly grasp why the Great Lakes are uniquely deadly, we must look past the scenic beauty and dive deep into the cold physics of the wave period, the specific time elapsed between successive waves. This is the exact point where the Great Lakes deviate from the standard laws of the ocean. In the vast, open stretches of the Atlantic or Pacific, a storm's wave period typically ranges from 10 to 15 seconds. On a ship, 10 seconds is a lifetime. It is the critical window your vessel needs to rise, for the freezing water to drain off the deck, and for the hull to stop its violent, agonizing flexing. 10 seconds allows for recovery. But on the Great Lakes, during a November gale, That period is compressed into a lethal, suffocating window of just 4 to 6 seconds. That time deficit is the fundamental difference between survival and a watery grave. To visualize this, think of it as a brutal physical assault. If you receive one heavy punch to the stomach, you can absorb the impact. You tense your muscles, you breathe through the pain, and you find your footing. You recover. But now imagine getting punched with that same force every 2 seconds for a full minute. You never return to equilibrium. Each strike lands while you are still reeling and breathless from the last blow. Your structure never gets a chance to stabilize, and the cumulative mechanical damage becomes catastrophic. A 700-foot ship, despite its size, reacts no differently than a human body under such a relentless barrage. This deadly compression is a direct result of a geographic variable called fetch. The continuous distance wind travels across open water to generate wave energy. In the ocean, fetch spans thousands of miles, giving waves the space they need to spread out, lose their steepness, and organize into long, rhythmic swells. But the Great Lakes are a confined, claustrophobic battlefield. Lake Superior, the greatest of them all, has a maximum fetch of only about 350 miles, stretching from the western shore at Duluth to the eastern shore near Sault Ste. Marie. When a November gale screams from the west, it has exactly 350 miles to generate massive, terrifying energy, but it lacks the room for those waves to breathe or spread out. The energy remains trapped, forced into a state of concentrated high-frequency violence. While the ocean might hit a ship with the slow, heavy swing of a sledgehammer every 15 seconds, the Great Lakes strike with the rapid, repetitive force of a hydraulic press every 5 seconds. And when those compressed waves arrive in that infamous set of 3, each one taller, steeper, and faster than the one before, they create a mechanical trap from which there is no escape. In this environment, a masterpiece of human engineering is transformed into a steel tomb in less than a minute. The physics of the Great Lakes do not negotiate. They do not show mercy. They simply execute their mathematical mandate. My dear friends, we often view steel as the ultimate symbol of strength, but in the realm of naval engineering, it is a material defined by its limits. Consider for a moment a simple household paperclip. If you take that wire and bend it once, the metal flexes and returns to its original shape. Bend it a second time, and you can feel the structure begin to weaken, though it remains stubbornly intact. But if you take that paperclip and bend it 3 times in rapid, brutal succession, the internal crystalline structure of the metal reaches its breaking point. It snaps. This phenomenon is known as metal fatigue, and it represents the fundamental, inescapable vulnerability of every single freighter ever launched into the cold, unforgiving waters of the Great Lakes. A ship's hull, despite being longer than 2 football fields and constructed of inch-thick steel plates, is not a rigid, immovable monument. It is, by necessity, a living structure designed to flex, to groan, and to yield under the immense weight of the water. Naval architects and engineers expect a 700-foot freighter to bend as much as 6 inches between the bow and the stern when subjected to the mountainous pressure of heavy seas. However, that entire, delicate engineering calculation relies on one critical life-saving assumption. the luxury of time. It assumes that the steel has a window of 10 to 15 seconds to recover its neutral position and breathe between each flex. On the Great Lakes during the height of a November gale, that assumption is nothing less than a death warrant. When a massive vessel encounters the phenomenon of the Three Sisters, it is subjected to two devastating mechanical stresses that work in a lethal cycle: hogging and sagging. Understanding these forces is key to understanding why size offers no protection against the lake's fury. Hogging occurs when a massive high-energy wave lifts the middle of the ship, leaving the bow and the stern hanging precariously in the air, completely unsupported by the water. In this state, the hull bends upward like a shallow, agonizing arch. The bottom plates of the ship are stretched to their absolute limit under tension, while the top plates on the deck are crushed together under immense compression. Then, in a heartbeat, faster than the crew can react, the stress reverses entirely. This is sagging. It happens when waves support the bow and the stern at their peaks, but the heavy midsection of the ship drops into a hollow, empty trough. Now the geometry of the hull flips. The metal bends downward like a shallow valley. The bottom plates that were just being stretched are now being pulverized by compression, and the top plates are being pulled apart with enough force to shear rivets. In the open ocean, a ship has the time to breathe through these transitions. It hogs, returns to a neutral equilibrium, and then sags. The metal settles, but the Three Sisters are designed to eliminate that breath. The first wave causes a violent hog. Before the steel can even begin to snap back or settle, the second wave slams the ship into a deep, catastrophic sag. The microscopic structure of the steel is worked back and forth with the frantic, destructive speed of that paperclip in the hands of a nervous student. Then comes the third wave, the kill shot. At this point, it no longer matters whether the wave causes hogging or sagging. The hull has already been compromised beyond repair. The steel has been pushed far past its elastic limit, and the welds have been stressed beyond their tolerance. When that third wall of water hits the midsection, the ship doesn't just sink, it snaps in two. Survivors of similar maritime disasters, the few who lived to tell the tale, describe a sound like a thunderous gunshot, a crack so loud and violent that it drowns out the shriek of the gale and the roar of the waves. The ship doesn't bend anymore, it breaks. Yet there is something even more terrifying and haunting lurking beneath this mechanical failure: the resonance trap. This is where physics meets horror. Every structure in the universe, from the smallest wine glass to the largest skyscraper, has a natural frequency, a specific rate at which it naturally wants to vibrate. If you tap a fine wine glass, it rings at a specific pitch determined by its material and shape. If you match that exact pitch with an external force, say a sustained musical note, you can cause the glass to vibrate more and more violently until it shatters into 1,000 shards. This is resonance, and steel ships are no different. Through a dark geometric coincidence of maritime geography, the natural vibration frequency of a 700-foot steel freighter is almost exactly the same as the wave frequency of a Great Lakes storm. Think about the cold, calculated horror of that mathematics. The waves aren't just hitting the ship, they are arriving at the exact rhythm that causes the ship's very structure to amplify the stress. Each wave doesn't just add its own force, it multiplies the energy already agonizing through the hull. The ship ceases to be a vessel and becomes a massive 700-foot tuning fork, vibrating in harmony with the very water that is trying to destroy it. In the world of engineering, this is known as harmonic loading, and it is considered one of the most dangerous phenomena in structural mechanics. The waves do not need to be mountainous or rogue to kill. A series of 30-foot waves arriving at short 4-second intervals can generate more cumulative destructive stress than a single 50-foot wave on the ocean with a longer period. The Great Lakes produce exactly the wrong wave pattern to match the natural frequency of exactly the wrong ships. It is a trap built from pure, indifferent mathematics, and mathematics doesn't negotiate. At 7 p.m. on the night of November 10th, 1975, the air over Lake Superior was thick with snow and the shriek of a hurricane-force gale. Captain Ernest McSorley, a veteran of the lakes, stood in the pilot house of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. He keyed his radio to speak with the SS Arthur M. Anderson, the vessel struggling through the same mountainous seas just a few miles behind him. When the Anderson's captain checked in on their status, McSorley's voice remained steady, a testament to decades of experience. "We are holding our own." Those were his final words. By 7:10 p.m., just 10 minutes later, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was gone. She didn't settle slowly into the waves. She didn't list or send out a frantic distress call. She simply vanished. Somewhere in that brief 10-minute window, a titan longer than 2 football fields, burdened with 26,000 tons of taconite pellets and carrying 29 brave, experienced souls, disappeared from the surface of Gichigami. When the Anderson's crew looked at their radar, the massive blip that represented the pride of the American fleet was gone. No wreckage bobbed in the freezing aftermath. No lifeboats were launched. Just a haunting, echoing absence where a giant had been a heartbeat before. The official Marine Board of Investigation later suggested the ship sank due to flooding caused by damaged hatch covers. But for the sailors who know the true temperament of Lake Superior, that paperwork explanation feels hollow. Flooding is a process. It gives you the luxury of time. It causes a ship to settle, to list, and gives the crew a window to fight for their lives, to launch survival gear, or at the very least, to cry out a mayday. The Fitzgerald did none of these things. She didn't drown. She was dismantled. If we look at the wreckage found in 530 feet of water, we can reconstruct the terror of those final seconds. The ship was already riding low, her holds heavy with water and ore. Sometime between 7 o'clock and 7:10, she encountered a Three Sisters wave set that synchronized perfectly with her hull's resonant frequency. The first wave buried the bow so deep it couldn't recover. Before the steel could rise, the second wave drove the nose even deeper, forcing the entire 729-foot structure into an extreme, agonizing sag. Then the third sister, a wall of water higher than the rest, slammed into the midsection. The Fitzgerald snapped. The break was so instantaneous and catastrophic that the bow continued its dive straight to the bottom while the stern section flipped, its propeller still spinning in the air before following her down. The wreckage tells the truth. 2 massive pieces of steel, separated by hundreds of feet, on the lake floor, the result of a clean, mathematical break. The lake didn't just take the Fitzgerald, it broke her back. However, the Fitzgerald was not the first, nor the largest, to fall victim to this frequency. 17 years earlier, on the evening of November 18, 1958, the SS Carl D. Bradley, known far and wide as the Queen of the Lakes, met her end on Lake Michigan. At 639 feet, she was the longest ship on the Great Lakes at the time, a purpose-built industrial giant. Her crew often joked that it would take a hurricane to sink her. They were wrong. As a violent storm with 60 miles per hour winds and 30-foot waves overtook the Bradley, the crew felt a shudder that bypassed the normal groan of a flexing hull. First, mate Elmer Fleming, one of the few who would survive, described the sensation as if the ship had hit a wall. Within minutes, the Queen was being torn apart. Captain Roland Bryan sent one desperate final mayday. "We are in serious trouble." In less than 20 minutes, a ship the length of 2 city blocks went from routine operation to total evacuation. But in those 30-foot seas, lifeboats were not havens. They were death traps. As First Mate Fleming clung to a life raft in the freezing dark, he witnessed the unthinkable. He saw the Bradley's back break. It wasn't a clean vertical snap like the Fitzgerald, it was a torsional fracture. He watched the stern section twist and rotate out of alignment with the bow, as if a giant, invisible hand had grabbed both ends of the ship and wrung it like a wet towel. The combined stress of hogging, sagging, and that relentless resonant vibration had finally pushed the steel past its elastic limit. The bow section rose almost vertically out of the water, standing like a massive steel tombstone for a moment before sliding backward into the icy depths of Lake Michigan. Of the 35 men aboard, 33 perished in the cold. Only Fleming and Frank Mays lived to tell the story of how the Queen broke. In the end, it wasn't a lack of size or strength that failed these ships. It was frequency. These titans didn't lose a fair fight to a storm. They were executed by the cold, calculated mathematics of the abyss. Next, my dear friends, to truly grasp the magnitude of the terror inherent to the Great Lakes, one must look far beneath the shifting surface of the water, down into the deep, jagged scars carved into the earth by ancient, retreating glaciers. These lakes are not uniform sandy basins. They are chaotic underwater landscapes, riddled with steep ridges, treacherous reefs, and shallow shoals. These are the remnants of glacial moraines, vast deposits of debris that act as invisible underwater tripwires for moving water. This is the precise stage where a manageable storm, one that a ship might weather on the open sea, transforms into a cold-blooded maritime execution. This transformation occurs through a terrifying physical process known as wave shoaling. In the deep, open stretches of the lake, wave energy is distributed broadly throughout the water column. It moves in long, rolling swells that look majestic rather than menacing. However, as these swells encounter shallow water, specifically when the depth of the lake becomes less than half the wavelength of the storm waves, the physics change instantly. The bottom of the wave begins to drag against the uneven lake bed. Friction takes hold of the wave's base, causing it to slow down. But the massive energy following behind it has nowhere to go but up. The wave begins to compress vertically. The back of the wave rapidly catches up with the front, and the rolling swell is suddenly forced into a towering vertical wall of water. What was a manageable 20-foot swell in the deep becomes a 30-foot, near-vertical face in the shallows. Lake Superior is the absolute master of this geographic deception. It hides these shoaling zones near places that have become graveyards: Isle Royale, the Keweenaw Peninsula, and the infamous Whitefish Point. A ship can be navigating what the crew considers manageable seas one moment. But as the hull passes over a hidden glacial ridge, the physics of shoaling take over with zero warning. This is exactly how the Three Sisters are born from the chaos. 3 waves hit a shoaling zone in rapid succession. The first wave stands up into a wall. The second, following immediately behind, climbs onto the back of the first, growing even taller and steeper. The third, benefiting from the massive compression of the previous 2, becomes a moving mountain of water, sometimes 40 feet high or more. Because they are compressed by the shallow bottom, they arrive with terrifying speed, often striking the ship just 3 to 4 seconds apart. Captains who have survived these rare encounters speak of them only in whispers. One anonymous captain described a harrowing encounter in the 1990s. When the third sister hit, the bow went under completely. From the pilot house, he wasn't looking at spray or foam. He was staring through the reinforced glass at solid green lake water. The ship was buried. Simultaneously, the stern lifted so high that the massive propeller came entirely out of the water, spinning uselessly in the freezing air. For 5 agonizing seconds, that 700-foot freighter was a teeter-totter on the very edge of oblivion. They survived that day by mere feet and mere seconds. Others were not so lucky. Survivors of other wrecks described the ship screaming, every weld, every steel plate, and every rivet vibrating with such intensity that you could feel the hull tearing itself apart in your very bones. In those moments, there is no steering your way out. There is no slowing down to wait for the storm to pass. You simply hold on to whatever is bolted down and hope that the mathematics of the lake works in your favor just one more time. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of any Great Lakes disaster is the timeline. In our cultural memory, we often compare maritime tragedies to the sinking of the Titanic. That giant took 2 hours and 40 minutes to disappear. In that window, passengers were woken. Lifeboats were meticulously loaded, and distress signals were organized. Even the modern disaster of the Costa Concordia gave its passengers hours to evacuate. But on the Great Lakes, when the Three Sisters strike a vulnerable ship, you don't have hours. You don't even have minutes. You have 90 seconds. 90 seconds from the moment the first wave hits to the moment the ship vanishes beneath the surface forever. The math is brutal, and it is final. If a ship's back breaks at 7 p.m., that ship is resting on the dark bottom of the lake by 7:01 p.m. This is the harrowing reason why so many wrecks, like the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, went down with all hands. There is no time to launch a lifeboat when you are dealing with 60-mile-per-hour winds and 30-foot walls of water. There is no time to even put on a survival suit, a process that takes at least 2 minutes in perfect calm conditions on dry land, let alone on a tilting, vibrating deck subjected to violent G-forces. By the time the crew fully understands that the ship has snapped, they are already being pulled underwater by 20,000 tons of steel. The loss of the SS Daniel J. Morale on Lake Huron in 1966 serves as a chilling testament to this horror. When the ship broke in half during a fierce storm, the sole survivor, Dennis Hale, watched in frozen catatonic shock from a raft. He saw the stern section of the ship, still powered by its engines, still fully lit, with men still at their posts, continue to drive itself into the darkness, moving away from the severed bow, before disappearing into the abyss. There was no time for a goodbye. There was only a sudden, violent, and lonely end. And if the crushing weight of the waves doesn't get you, the water itself will finish the job. In November, the Great Lakes act as a massive inland refrigerator. The water temperature hovers at a bone-chilling 38 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, hypothermia is not a slow drifting process, it is a total biological shutdown. Anyone who manages to survive the initial sinking has maybe 10 minutes before their muscles fail, their breathing hitches, and their heart simply stops. The lakes do not give up their dead easily. The icy, low oxygen water preserves the bodies in a macabre state of suspension. But the depth and the violence of the storms make any hope of recovery nearly impossible. To this day, sailors like Old Whitey on the SS Kamloops remain at their posts, perfectly preserved in the depths near Ile Royale, permanent crew members of a ghost ship that went down in minutes within sight of the shore. In the dying season of November, the distance to the safety of the shore doesn't matter. The massive size of your ship offers no sanctuary. Only the frequency of the water matters. And when the timeline of a disaster is compressed into a mere 90 seconds, human skill and engineering are stripped away, replaced by nothing but pure, cold, and indifferent luck. Today, we stand at the pinnacle of maritime achievement, living in what many would call an era of profound technological arrogance. We possess global positioning systems that can track a vessel's location within a matter of inches. We have high-frequency satellite communications that link a captain to any point on the globe instantly, and sophisticated weather radar systems that can peer through the thickest, most violent clouds. To the captains of the 1950s and 60s, men who navigated by dead reckoning, stars, and gut instinct, our modern bridge would look like nothing short of sorcery. Yet, beneath this veneer of digital control, there remains a haunting fundamental truth that has not changed since the first sail was hoisted on these waters. None of this technology can prevent the arrival of the Three Sisters. Radar is an incredible tool, an indispensable guardian of the modern age, but it possesses a fatal blind spot for the very thing that kills. Radar is designed to detect precipitation. It meticulously maps the density of rain, the chaotic swirl of lake-effect snow, and the broad movement of massive storm systems. But waves do not reflect radar signals with the same clarity that rain does. From the perspective of a ship's radar screen, the surface of the lake often appears as a uniform mass of clutter. It looks the same whether it is a manageable 10-foot swell or a lethal set of Three Sisters forming just 300 yards ahead in the darkness. Modern wave modeling does exist, but it is purely statistical, not real-time. A meteorologist in a distant office can tell a captain that conditions are favorable for large waves, but they lack the godlike precision to say, in exactly 60 seconds, 3 waves will strike your hull at the precise resonant frequency required to snap your ship in two. By the time a captain sees the first sister with his own eyes through the reinforced glass of the pilot house window, the math of his survival has already been decided. A 1,000-foot freighter carrying tens of thousands of tons of cargo does not turn on a dime. It requires long minutes to alter its course and even longer to change its massive forward momentum. The Three Sisters do not offer minutes. They arrive in seconds. While some modern vessels carry specialized forward-looking sonar, a few seconds of warning is only enough time for a sailor to brace for the impact, not to escape the inevitable. You simply cannot out-engineer a fundamental law of physics. The structural fatigue of steel, the lethal frequency of the waves, and the geometric precision of the fetch do not care about your GPS coordinates or your satellite link. They only care about the absolute material limits of the hull. The real evolution in Great Lakes shipping has not occurred in the high-tech shipyards of the coast. It has happened within the human mind. The most significant change since the tragic loss of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald in 1975 is not a piece of hardware, but a profound change in human behavior. After the SS Carl D. Bradley shattered and sank in 1958, we mandated ultrasonic testing to find the microscopic fractures hiding in aging steel. After the Fitzgerald vanished, we redesigned hatch covers, improved loading procedures, and made weather routing mandatory across the fleet. But even with stronger alloys, better welds, and superior sensors, the fundamental danger of the lakes remained a constant. Eventually, the shipping companies, the insurers, and the veteran captains reached a collective, sobering realization. The lakes are, and always will be, the boss. Today, when the fierce November gales begin to howl across the basin, the industry chooses a different, humbler path. The economics of modern shipping simply cannot absorb the catastrophic loss of a 1,000-foot vessel and its entire crew. The legal liability of such a failure is staggering, and the public relations disaster would be permanent. But more importantly, we have finally learned the lesson in blood. When the wind picks up and the fetch begins to compress the energy of the water into that lethal 4-second period, the ships stay tied to the docks. The iron ore sits in the port. The grain elevators wait. We have replaced the mid-century arrogance of conquering nature with the quiet, survival-driven wisdom of retreat. This personification of the Three Sisters as malevolent, sentient entities is a psychological coping mechanism, a way for us to frame the indifferent. Sailors have always personified the sea to make sense of a force that can kill with such capricious cruelty. It is easier for the human mind to imagine a predator with motivations than it is to face a set of cold, indifferent equations. But whether you call them sisters, ghosts, or the rhythm of death, the result is identical. The trap is geometric, mathematical, and permanent. 350 miles of fetch, shallow glacial ridges for shoaling, and water cold enough to kill a man in minutes. These variables have not changed since the glaciers retreated 10,000 years ago. The Great Lakes are still waiting. They do not care if it takes 5 years or 50 years between wrecks. They are indifferent to our modern advancements and our digital displays. The trap is still there, lying in wait for the variables to align once more. The right ship, the right length, and the right storm. We have not conquered these lakes. We have only learned when to stay home and wait for the fury to pass. In November, when the frequency of the waves matches the legacy of the lost, the lakes are no longer a workplace. They are a test And the only way to win that test is to refuse to take it in the first place. Because once the first sister hits the bow, the math takes over, and the math does not negotiate. As you look out over the horizon of these beautiful waters today, remember the Fitzgerald, the Bradley, the Daniel J. Morrell, and the SS Carl D. Smith. Remember that beneath the breathtaking beauty of the great water lies a terrifying mathematical precision. The lakes have time, and they are still waiting. Before we conclude today's message, thank you for walking this harrowing journey through the mathematics of the abyss with me. These are not just stories. They are the heavy legacies of 350 miles of fetch and the brutal, unforgiving physics of 38-degree water. If you carry a personal story of these lakes or a maritime mystery that haunts your family, please share it in the comments below. Let us work together to keep the memory of the lost alive. If this deep dive into the Three Sisters resonated with you, Psycho or I invite you to like, share, and follow for our upcoming explorations into the mysteries of the deep. Your support allows these vital stories to be told to a new generation. Until our paths cross again in the next video, stay safe, respect the power of the water, and I'll see you soon